Okay, welcome back to the DT Wellbeing Podcast with me, DT. I'm very grateful to have another guest on, a gentleman in Dublin named Colm Gavin, singer-songwriter extraordinaire, and we're going to have a great chat. But before we do, right, and followers, you'll all have, this is, my fourth guest on, but I've also had 9 prior podcast episodes. I'm not promoting my shit, where I am, where you can find me. So please, I'm on SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. So please subscribe and like and all that sort of stuff. My producer's kicking my ass because I never promote it. Right, Colm, how are you, sir?
Good, Dan. It's good to be talking to a man from the Rebel County.
Oh, look, it's we're few and far between up here, especially during this pandemic. It kind of shifts a lot of people home, but I'm one of those that just hung around and. Yeah, look, and likewise, mate, I'm delighted to be able to speak with you. You're based in Clondalkin, isn't that correct? In Dublin.
That's right, yeah, I am. Yeah.
Nice. And so I'll just give a brief intro, if that's okay with you. Like, I know you, but I'd like to introduce you for the audience and then maybe allow yourself to introduce yourself more formally and in more detail. So, Colm Gavin, as I said, singer-songwriter. I had a guest on 3 weeks ago, Fiona Lennon, and I mentioned to her, I was like, you guys are like unicorns, It's just like, I don't know. In the space of 3 weeks, I'm getting the opportunity to speak to 2, but prior to that, I've never spoken to 1. So I find it a real privilege for me as well to be speaking to a man, like, in that sort of industry, and it's doing so well, and I'm delighted to see it. So, Colm, you might introduce yourself a little bit more in detail, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I started playing music when I was about 12 or so. I would have been coming out of primary school into secondary school. And I think for me, I was terrible at sport. I come from a family where Gaelic football was really the crowning jewel in everything that it was to be a Gavin. My father played hurling for Dublin, and my uncle played for the Dubs. My grandfather played county football in Clare, in West Clare. And I think for me, I found it very difficult to find a sense of identity outside of that because I was dreadful at football. It was sport just wasn't my calling. And so when I started to take a huge interest in music, I began in the Clondalkin School of Music. And I was blessed with a wonderful teacher, Peter Stanton, who for a time in his life served in the Army No. 1 band down in Cork. So in your neck of the woods.
Nice.
And he'd be in his 70s now, but he even back then, and this I'm talking about 15 years ago, he was somebody who really worked with an army regimental kind of style. He taught us music theory in its most abstract and refined sense. And I think, as difficult as I found that to begin with, now my understanding of music is such that I can read music as though it were a second language. And at the time when you're 12 or 13, you just want to play a guitar and impress a girl, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're looking at, as we call it, fly shit, on the paper. But when I was in my teens, I would have been in various bands. Punk was a big thing in the mid 2000s, and so I was reluctantly in various different punk groups. And then when I got into college, I went to Griffith College to study journalism and visual media. I met a couple of guys, David Kozak and Ray Brennan, and we hit it off. And we started a band called Shiloh Palace. That would have been my first innings in fronting a band, and also the experience of just everything that comes with that, and dealing with management for the first time and promo and agents and all that kind of stuff. So in 2014, and I'm fast forwarding quite quickly here, I decided to go solo because college was done. A lot of the people who were in the band were kind of just in it as a college passion project, but weren't really interested in being in the music industry full time. And for me, it's like I made a bargain with the devil. This was going to be something I'd be doing for my whole life. And
well done, mate.
Thanks, dude. Thanks. And, from the time I went solo, the way I look at it, I always look at things in kind of 5-year arcs. So at around 2014, 2015, I'd made the decision that I was going from playing bars to 2 or 3 people, which was equally soul destroying and educational. But I'd made the decision that in the next 3 or 4 years that I'd move to doing this professionally. Not that I wasn't, because I had sort of part-time day jobs, but never anything serious. And I just wanted to do it full time. And so I'd made a commitment to myself that I would, and that was what was going to be. And you know, I've heard you talk many times about visual manifestations, and many of us are familiar with this whole notion of the law of attraction and that kind of thing. So over the next couple of years, I've begun to cultivate the kind of life that I wanted in music, and thanks be to God, I'm here today. So.
Oh, mate, and you're doing so well. And like, I just really respect people that, you know, go all in, no matter what it is, you know, and back themselves, regardless of what society might say is like, you know, where the opportunities are at or how likely things will work out. Because like with people that do things that are a little outside the norm, myself included, like you get a lot of worry. A lot of it comes from a place of love, but a lot of it is just like hate and weirdness and like people questioning like your decisions, but they're your decisions to make. And once you make them all in, and you've 100% on that, man. And like, I love the word, like the manifestation of your goals that, you know, I do think there's power in that. And I was actually just speaking with a friend of mine here in Trinity yesterday about that. And she's just currently reading The Secret, you know, the law of attraction. I've read it, and, I've had a lot of conversations on it. And I think the most power for me, I don't kind of think it as like a magical thing. You think something and it just gets delivered on your doorstep. I think by, you know, focusing so much on your goals that, you know, it just makes clarity in your own mind that the more you focus, the more you manifest, the more you kind of create mantras around these goals that are personal to you, the more likely they will be achieved because you're just clear on your goals from that, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And I'm a big believer in this whole idea of 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration, because
100%.
You know, you can have, and I'm always having this conversation with people where I say, you know, you can have manifestation charts to beat the band. You can write down your goals 1,000,000 times, but it's about you taking the initiative to get up and say, you know, I've been getting up at 11 o'clock every week. This week I'm going to get up at 7, and I'm going to give myself that extra 4 hours to do what I couldn't do in the day because I'm complaining that I never have enough time. Or you ask yourself, why haven't I rang that agency? Why haven't I gotten to touch with my manager? And a lot of it comes down to fear, because you don't want the answer to be no. So you think, well, I'll wait till the day where I'm a little more comfortable. I'll wait till the day where I think the answer is more likely going to be yes. And that day never comes. You know, you just have to suck it in and go bite the bullet, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I really like that. My response to you saying 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. My response was like, yeah, 100%. So when it was listening, you know, I didn't mean that literally, you know, that was just my automatic reaction. But like, I couldn't agree with it more. It's like, and I was only talking to a guy yesterday as well about the band U2, and I was talking about Bono, and I was talking about how massively successful they have been and like their net value or whatever right now. And like we were discussing, we're like the common denominator is it's just work ethic. The people that make it to that level, yes, of course you're going to have some form of talent, and you know that's the 1% inspiration. But these people that achieve at that level, like put them down, look into all of their history. Those like superstars, it's work rate, it's work ethic, it's putting in the hours. That separates regardless, and it's a common denominator because you can have all the inspiration in the world, and without the work, it won't happen.
100%, yeah, 100%.
That's class, and I'm looking. Things are going well for you at the moment. Like you've made a good fist of things.
No, things are good. I mean, I kind of up to that arc that we were just discussing about there. When I got to about 2014, I'd started making the decision that, okay, how do I present the kind of artist that I am? You know, because up until this point, when you're playing in bars, a lot of people just misinterpret that, okay, this is just what you do. You're just a cover artist. You just, you know, you're doing things to make ends meet. And so I made the decision to kind of move from that world into the world of original music. So in 2014, I brought out my first release, which was called Your Endless Slumber. And I made it with a friend of mine, Kyle Roach. We were both teaching in the Clondalkin School of Music. And at nighttime, we would turn the classroom into a makeshift studio. And so we recorded 5 tracks. And really all it was just to have something that I could present to people, so I could set up a Facebook page and people could hear my music somehow. And it was released on the 22nd of September in 2014. And it got to #1 in the Irish singer-songwriter charts. And from that moment, that began kind of a cycle of things. So the following year, I was asked to be, I had the lead part in a movie called Shoebox Memories, which was like an Irish kind of underground film, which did really well, that Aer Lingus ended up buying. And then later in that year, I got signed to BO Records, which is Moya Brennan from Clonan's record label. So this was kind of the beginning of that manifestation thing that I was talking about, where there's a difference between dreaming the dream and living the dream. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time posting inspirational quotes, and they just do it to back themselves up. It's kind of put reinforcement to what you see in your head. But the people that, like you mentioned, who I've seen to be successful are the ones who take all that energy, and you never see them on social media. But then when you do, it's like, okay, well, I've signed to this label, or I'm bringing out this album.
Yeah.
Because nobody sees the behind the scenes work, as you know, Dan.
Yes. And the harder you work, the luckier you get. And it's like, you know,
right.
And it's all what happens in the background. It's the hours and hours and the early starts and the late nights. And it results in this stuff. And that's why we do it, you know. But there's a lot going on that people don't see. And that's not fun. And that's not glamorous. But I think if you do that over and over and over, the compound effect is like, you know, you can kind of be on a different planet, you know, if you do it so far, because, you know, these they say like any sort of concentration over a 6-month period can put you 5 years ahead in life, you know, if you take things seriously. And you get shit done.
100%.
Yeah, and there's power in it. And I kind of like, anybody can take that and action it and turn it into like, I think there's a lot of a kind of defeatist attitude amongst people, especially in Ireland. We have this kind of like inferiority complex as a society. We don't back ourselves enough, I find. There's a kind of a collective low self-esteem, which shouldn't be the case. But I feel as though that can be kind of self-defeating. And I've spoken before about like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you don't think these things are possible, and like if you don't think you have a gift for whatever you do, you just don't do it. You don't push yourself as hard as you possibly could have. But I just think if you realize that no matter what industry you're in, if you put in the extra hours and work the extra shift and put in the extra mile, like you're going to be just in a different, you know, because that's the difference. It's not about the talent. It's not about genetics. It's not about anything. It's just like, how hard are you going to work? And they say, you know, there's no traffic on the extra mile. You know,
100%. And I mean, one of the people who, I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, his name was Jim Rohn. He was a motivational speaker in the 1980s. Yeah. And Jim, one of my favorite quotes, and I have it written in every notebook that I have, and I had it on my wall for a long time, was, don't mistake movement for achievement. It's easy to get faked out by being busy, but the question should always be busy doing what? And that's something I come back to again and again too, which I'm sure is something you've applied in your own life as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely have. And it's like, you know, direction is far more important than speed, you know, direction, you know, and then you start going on that line. But there's a lot of people that are just busy, you know, and they're how I would describe human doings as opposed to human beings. They kind of justify their existence with just doing loads of random stuff and like flat out. And then, you know, if you're working towards your goal, which you have and I have, that's passion. You put in the hours and it's passion. You do that for somebody else, that's stress. And that's just like, and you know, that's different. But yeah, look, man, I'm all about it. I still don't really know. Again, I've spoken so much of The Secret, the Law of Attraction, stuff like that. You think I'd have like a definitive kind of impression on myself or opinion on it. I just don't. But what I do know is that by putting goals down on paper and focusing on them and seeing them every day, like right here, I have it on the screen to make the studio more pleasant, but I have a big, like all these stickers on my wall, because I wake up every morning and I look at it immediately. And over there, when I wake up and I put my head off the pillow, I'm looking at Nelson Mandela quotes that motivate me, you know, and they're just reminders. It doesn't make it happen. It's not a promise. There's no guarantees, but just by seeing it over and over, either consciously or subconsciously, it gets ingrained in your psyche. And then, you know, you're more focused, whether you know it or not. So there's power in that. That's cool, man.
Absolutely. But I think as well, one of the things that you kind of touched on there is it's also about your relationship to these quotes, because eventually it can become a little bit like, you know, the concept of the pink sofa. You know, you see it so often and then someone comes into your home and says, oh, you have a pink sofa, but you stop seeing it because it just becomes in the foreground. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think
absolutely
your relationship to all these quotes is important too.
100%. Yeah. I totally agree. But that's great. And so at the moment, are you working on any new music? Can we expect anything out soon? I was listening to your Spotify again this morning. Like it's just brilliant stuff, man. I got to give credit where it's due. Really, really good stuff. And it's, you know, I back everyone and I'm like a big supporter. I am this guy that will, you know, uplift anybody and promote anybody for doing what they want. Yeah. So anyway, back to my question. Are we to expect anything new?
Yeah, well, back in April, I mean, once we went into lockdown, this year, like we were talking earlier about 5-year plans, 2020 for me was kind of to be sort of the ceiling in gold of a lot of things, you know, like it was the culmination of a lot of hard work on different aspects. And then as soon as March rolled around, all of those things just got kicked up the backside, you know?
I know,
and
man.
So my plan was to be in studio with a lot of different musicians. I had a new record in the pipeline, but it was to be like a big produced record with my record label. And I thought, well, I'm at home. I don't have the facility to record as I could in a proper studio, but I'm going to do some home recording. Now, I'd be the worst person in the world for technology, as we spoke about earlier.
Second worst.
But I thought, well, look, with the limited technology that I have, I've recorded it's sort of a short album called Flamingo Variations Home Recordings Volume 1. And basically, nice. It's 6 original songs and 2 spoken word pieces, which is something up until this point that I'd never done. Back in 2014, I brought out my first book, which was called An Exchange with Goliath, which is just poems, short stories, and songs. And that was released by a group in the UK called Original Writing Publishing. And this was the first time since then that I'd harkened back to anything like poetry or prose or that kind of stuff. So it's available on SoundCloud, exclusively on SoundCloud. 6 original songs and 2 spoken word pieces. But I have every intention.
Check them out, DTW listeners. Check them out and tell me in your comments what you felt, because you feel when you listen to stuff. You feel so in comments afterwards. I'd like you to pass on a bit of your opinions and impressions, because look, it's just real class stuff, man. And like, you know, I'm into music, and I listen to a lot of, you know, I have playlists according to my mood, or like what I'd like to cultivate in my mood. And in the morning it might be really upbeat, and at night it might be nice and relaxing, but mostly I'm listening to inspirational stuff that gets me going. And they're not like, you know, mantras. They're just songs that apply to me and me alone, and they get me going and they get me working. So, but also I love poetry, and I even when I was a kid in school, I loved poetry, and I didn't really understand. So most of the songs in that inspiration playlist I have is hip hop and it's rap, and now I get it. I just love the written word. I love lyrics. I love words. And growing up, I love poetry, and now I'm back loving poetry. But all my teenage years, I've listened to hip hop, and now I get it. I just poetry first. The music, put it into tempo and put it in rhythm. You know, it's enjoyable. But all I want is
that's what it is. Yeah.
But that is cool, man. And like in terms of yourself, like what do you like to listen to? Would you do the same thing as that? Like, would you have kind of like, would you listen to music in order to, you know, increase, like right now, like we mentioned there about COVID-19 in 2020, right? So everybody has had to overcome obstacles and roadblocks, and everybody's plans went out the window, as you said, and it's affected lots of people's moods. And I'm just trying to, with this whole podcast, it's just trying to make people a little bit, you know, healthier, happier, you know, during this time. And like, would you have any kind of do you use music for those reasons, or would you have any kind of background in that?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, like the records for me, like many of my contemporaries, there's the records that made you get into the business in the first place. You know, for me, if I'm on a kind of a low kilter, I just stick on Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. You know, anything from the 1960s, Bob Dylan, any of the early Beatles records, any of that kind of stuff. And there's an emotional connection to it in the way that, you know, when you get a smell, and the smell brings you back to somewhere, and remember, you know, you think of who you were with, and maybe it was someone who you were in a relationship with at that time. And so there's a lot of muscle memory with music for me. So if I turn on a certain, but by conjunction with that, there's a lot of music that I can't listen to unless I'm in a certain place, because it could have a lot of emotional ties for me, or it just brings me to a certain point in my life. Not from a negative perspective, because sometimes it's not to look on the melancholy stuff. But there's, you know, I'm not going to listen to it at rush hour as I'm trying to get into College Green for meat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, totally. But there's power in that. I think there's like music, like poetry. It's very emotive, right? And and they say, what is it? When you're happy, you hear the beat of the song. When you're sad, you listen to the lyrics.
Yeah,
there's some quote in that.
That's it.
But it's yeah, and I get that as well. Like they say that with the smells, it is the most powerful sense to evoke memory. But music does that for me as well. You hear songs, like you think, I always equate it to summers. Like when I was a student and when I was a teacher, I used to spend summers in different parts of the planet. But there was like whatever songs were out at that time, it brings me back, and I think of the adventures. And like
100%. Yeah.
No, it is cool. It is cool. So how has, like, you just touched on it briefly, but how has like 2020 been for you? How have things been in this? It's a weird year, right?
Well, one of the things, like, I'm always talking about this idea of process, that everything comes back to process, that it's very little to do with inspiration and it's more to do with how many hours you're going to put in. And with interviews that I've given in the past, I'll always say, oh, you know, I do my 2 to 3 hours of writing every day. But really, if I was on the road, that would never happen, you know, because there's too much keepy uppy work to be doing. Like if your sound check is at 2 and you've got to do a radio promo interview at 3:30, and then you've got to go for dinner and then you're on the stage, there's no time in that to sit down and be profound. No. So with 2020, with COVID and everything that's happened, one of the things that it's afforded me is to be able to revisit my process and say, how could I do, like, okay, can I get enough time for sleep? Can I, can I utilize the day a little bit better? Because from March onwards, it was kind of like, here's your day. What are you going to do with it? And for a lot of people, as you know yourself, I mean, you were talking about your motivational quotes on the wall, and when you look up in the morning, the first thing you see is Nelson Mandela. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. Well, Jordan has this notion of clean up your room. So your room, the room that you spend most of your time in, is an outward manifestation of what's going on in your head. So if you are in a messy room, it's a reflection of messy thoughts and stuff like that. So the first thing I pay close attention to is, like, how clean is my room? What time am I waking up in the morning? And, like, what way, like, for a lot of people, waking up in your room, you could be waking up hungover 90% of the time. You could be waking up dreading work. It's that place where your alarm rings, all this type of stuff. So I tried to make my room a place that I couldn't wait to get up. You know what I mean? I couldn't wait to start a productive day, as opposed to just dreading hearing the alarm ringing and thinking, my God, what is today going to bring? So 2020, it certainly afforded me the opportunity to review my process and ask myself, what don't I like? Not necessarily this old Asian proverb of, like, hold something and if it doesn't give you joy, throw it away. But just paying a little bit more attention to the structure of my day, I guess. It's afforded me that, if nothing else.
Well, that's brilliant, man. That is brilliant. Like I say to, like, clients, and they want to do public speaking, especially, like, if you have, like, a routine, or if you've built habits, it's just easier to do the stuff that we know we have to do, like we know we should do, but by having those routines and habits, and especially in the evening, in the morning, I call them the bookends to my day. If you have those first 2 or 3 hours solid, last 2 or 3 hours solid, it takes the thinking out of it. You just, after a certain amount of time, you don't even have an option in your own head. This is what you do. This is what you do. This is what you do. Because when you're not questioning it or having it as an option, it's easier that way. It's just so embedded. Like, I couldn't get out of my routine if I wanted to. I honestly, it would take me a long time to remove myself from this. I have a real structure to every single day, 7 days a week, and I just bang, bang, bang. And it's really enjoyable. It gets done, and I don't have to think about the stuff that once upon a time I would have had to when I was proactively, intentionally developing these habits and routines. It makes things easier. But I like what you said there about the clean room. There is, like, I talk a lot about mindfulness. Like, I'm qualified in mindfulness-based stress reduction, and one of the most mindful things that we can do in our days is to clean, and especially, like, cleaning a mirror, especially, such a mindful activity. Your mind couldn't be anywhere else, because you're literally looking at that mirror that needs to be cleaned. You're seeing every spot, so you're not thinking about yesterday that could cause depression. You're not worried about tomorrow, which could cause anxiety. You're cleaning that mirror, and that's all you are. And there's power in that, and also having a clean room and having a clean office space, that decluttered scene that you either wake up to or when you're sitting on your desk, it affords you a bit of clarity of the mind as well.
Well, while I'm talking to you now, do you mind if I ask you a question? What advice would you give to somebody in any walk of life? Because, I mean, you're somebody who's invested so much time into this notion of well-being and taking care of yourself. And I was reading about, I think it might have been Kobe Bryant, who at the height of his career was spending $1 million a year just on his body and his well-being. What advice would you give to somebody who was in a rut, who, like, can get 2 good months of a run out of all this positivity and manifesting positivity, but then there's a drop for 3 months? What advice would you give to somebody like that?
So the number one piece of advice that I give to everybody on the planet is that if you were to focus on anything or any group of things to focus on in your day, it's the core 4. So it's like, we can set ourselves very high standards, and if we were to drop them, like, you could get a lower self-esteem, or, you know, that can affect how you feel about yourself. But just breaking yourself out of that positive habit that you had, and like you said, going from a positive 2 months to a bad 3 months, it doesn't make you a bad, like, you shouldn't feel any worse about yourself. But the most important thing, if you just wanted to restart, the core 4 is the initial one. So that is, return to your 8 hours of sleep. Get your 5 glasses of water, which equates to 2 liters. Get 40 minutes of exercise a day, and make sure 3 of those days is a hard workout, but the other day could just be going for a walk. Make sure you're getting out, getting fresh air. And then the last one is to eat, and eat well. So get your nutrition on point, just like healthy, balanced. You don't have to go into too much detail in the fads of diets. Just like whatever your granny told you is healthy, so eat healthy. Eat that stuff for a while. And that's kind of like base level. For restarting, I call it my like renewing well-being. So the core 4 will cover you physiologically, and that'll make you feel better. Like, that's just how we're designed as human beings. But then also there's like getting clear on your goals, getting things down on paper. That clarity can add a little bit of sense of direction and sense of purpose. Giving, so that altruistic happiness that we can get from just helping others without expecting anything in return. So charity is a good way to kind of get back feeling good about yourself and get back into your routines. Meditation, right? So again, so after you've got that core 4, you're just looking after yourself as an organism. You look after your spiritual health, you look after your emotional health. Meditation is brilliant for that. I use Insight Timer as a guided meditation, but even just concentrating on cleaning a mirror, like getting focused, cleaning rooms, because that can center you. It's a mindful-based practice, and it kind of returns you to the reality of your existence. Because all our problems, they actually, when you actually look at your day-to-day, there's nothing really bad about it. But what we get worried about and we get sad about is missed opportunities, and also non-direction of the future, or worried about things that are hypothetically going to come up. And then if I was to say one term or one sentence for everybody to pay attention to, is just be here now. So it's a mindfulness mantra, and there's just power in it, because your whole life, your whole existence is that breath you've just taken. So the future isn't here yet. It doesn't deserve our stress and our angst. The past is gone. We can't change it. It's no longer relevant. It's a story to tell without judgment. But if you're just here now, generally speaking, the breath you take is quite pleasant. From day to day, you wouldn't. This is a lovely conversation we're having, Colm. I'm really enjoying myself. So when you break it down that your breath is your life, life is good. Like, this moment is good, so life is good. The other stuff doesn't exist. It's make believe.
100%. Yeah.
And I wear it around my chest, like that's my mantra. Like, I do have it on a pendant on my chest, like, be here now, because it takes away any of this make-believe stress that we create for ourselves and unnecessary unhappiness. Whereas if you just focus on this breath, this moment, you know, generally speaking, it's okay.
Yeah, you've got me very conscious of my breath now. which is good.
Hey, you know what the good thing about it is? You still have one, mate.
100%, yeah. 2 arms, 2 legs, you know? Yeah.
Above ground. That's all that's, you know,
for the moment, anyway.
Look, there's opportunities. If you wake up in the morning, you're breathing. Look, I know that might sound very like reductionist and very kind of simplistic, but that's how life should be. Life isn't complicated. Us as human beings complicate life unnecessarily, you know, and it's easier to cultivate happiness when you take things down to the more simple level.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and the big stuff happens then as a result of that. You know, it's a cruel kind of irony of the whole thing, because like when you focus on this, and as we said there about like the core 4 and renewing well-being, but just looking after yourself, building that routine, like those are the things that are actually important, and the stuff that we might put value on, and the stuff like society puts value on more than like the individuals. There's more chance of achieving that stuff that others put massive value on. But it doesn't come, like, you don't worry about that. Worry about, you know, day-to-day stuff, looking after yourself, because that big stuff that might stress us out if we think about it, that happens from these routines and the well-being and looking after yourself, you know, but you can't put the horse before the cart.
No, and something that I say quite often that kind of runs parallel to what you've just said is, my mantra has always been, better to be ready and not have an opportunity. Better to be ready and not have an opportunity than to have an opportunity and not be ready, you know? And, and that's kind of what you were saying there, where if you constantly cultivate a state of being where if you got an opportunity at the drop of a hat, you'd be ready for it, well, then opportunities start to appear more and more. I mean, you quoted Gary Player earlier when you said, you know, it seems that the harder I work, the luckier I get. And it's so true, you know.
It is so true. And so like the hard work is just like, as I alluded to, that's what I put everything down to. Whatever happens to me, it's just hard work. It's just the hours being put in prior. But my mother, like, and I love my mom to bits, and we got on so well in nearly everything, but we do disagree on a couple of things. And one is like luck and fortune, and my mom would be very kind of spiritual and, like, you know, loves kind of thoughts of energy. She's lit more candles for me in Cork than you would ever believe. I keep saying, Mom, you're going to start a fire. Stop. I don't need all these candles to be lit. It's lovely. And it works, right? So I'm not saying what's right and what's wrong. I'm just saying two different people's opinions. But when I talk about work ethic and what I want to achieve, and I'm saying it'll happen, my mom's like, look, I'm praying for you. I'm wishing you the best. I wish you all the best luck in the world, you know. And you know, for me, luck is so like opportunity. Like, it's just when opportunity and preparation combine. That's when things happen, right? So that's as you alluded to, you've prepared, then the opportunity presents itself, and then it happens, right? So like the luck then kind of, I don't know, I don't put value on luck because I like to feel as though I'm in control of my controllables. And then the luck, you know, I'm just, if anything, I'm just seeing opportunities. Other people say, oh my God, we're just so lucky to be there at that place. It's like, well, there's other people there, they just had their eyes closed. They didn't see it. Sure. So you got to see the opportunities, you got to prepare in the background, and then things can happen.
100%. But at the end, you do have to account for a lot of things in life that are just completely out of our control. Do you know what I mean? You know, if my dream was, no, absolutely, I'm not crossing.
No, and I agree with you.
In the general, because, you know, my calling in life could be to be the great dairy milk caramello bar sampler of the world, but if I'm lactose intolerant, that ain't gonna happen. You know what I mean?
Correct, sir. You know, and you know when it was most brought to my attention, right? So when I was saying there in terms of the luck and things, that's kind of day to day. But what I do know for sure, in 2016, I went volunteering in Mozambique, and I was working for 2 months building schools and teaching children in Mozambique, Southeast Africa, like sub-Saharan Africa. I think that year it was the poorest country on the planet, right? So, and I was coaching these kids' sports. I was coaching them Gaelic football. I was like, it was great crack in the evenings, right? But what broke my heart about that was that these kids were born in Mozambique, and with the same personalities, the same ambition, the same like love for life. You could see the smiles before. It was just wonderful. But I was cognitively aware of the fact that their opportunities were almost nil when I compared it to the students I was teaching in Cork at the time.
Yeah.
And that it was a level of frustration that I hadn't experienced before, because like I was born into a family in Cork and I had absolutely no control over that. Like 14th of March 1985, I took my first breath and I'm in Cork, right? So like zero control there. So that's fucking luck. And Gary Vee always says it. You have like a 1 in a billion chance of even being born. But for me to be born in Cork and then having these opportunities, like I had no control over where I was born. So when I saw these kids in Mozambique, like that's when it hit home in terms of the luck. That's just luck of the draw. You're just born where you are, and that is significant because, as you said, you know, with situations like that are out of your control, you know, that is lucky or unlucky. But yeah, man, like totally agree with that. There are so many things that, you know, genetically or geographically, we have no control over. And then, but I say this as well, when we think of the 1% of the population, we think of, like Donald Trump obviously is in the paper now a lot now, and you think of like Zuckerberg and these lads, right? And we think, yeah, that's the 1%. If you're in Western society, you got a roof over your head, you're not worried about food, you have an education of whatever level, you're in the 1%. We're all in the 1%. If anybody's watching this on YouTube, you're in the 1%. So, and then these lads that go on to become billionaires, like they're 1% of the 1%. But being in Ireland, whoever you are, out of 7.5 billion people on the planet, you're in the 1%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also in Mozambique, zero suicide. There's no depression because they're not comparing. Like social pressures don't exist. Nobody has anything, like without being disrespectful or disparaging. So they don't have that sort of level of expectations upon themselves. That one trip for me was the most significant in my whole life. I came back. I was quite an unhappy teen and quite unhappy guy in my 20s because I put ridiculous pressure on myself. I was never satisfied, and I felt as though I should be doing better than I was at every single stage, and it was ridiculous. And I came back from Mozambique, it's like, I have no right to be unhappy. I have no right, like, you know. So that's, for me anyway, that was the most significant thing. And again, that is pure luck.
But naturally, an experience like that would be. I mean, when you're faced with the stark reality, as you probably remember when we were kids, the troker boxes, you know, that there was this notion of there's a them and there's a degree of poor that you don't even see. It's just, it's kind of based off your own generosity, but we were made very aware in school, you would have been as well as I was, of this notion that there are those who are less fortunate than you. And I think that's a fine notion in and of itself, but you got to experience something like that firsthand where, you know, the notion of rolling a ball out onto the pitch would give these kids so much joy. And you think there are people at their age in Dublin who can't be content with the new iPhone that they've got or the €1,000 that they've gotten from their relatives for Christmas. They're just hung up on things, which, listen, I understand are valid, and I'm not trying to take away from other people's concerns.
Totally.
But when you see lads kicking a bag of wind around a pitch and bringing them absolute joy, you wonder to yourself, at what point do we get off in the wrong station where our priorities are so out of whack that we can't just appreciate something like that? And these guys who have, from an aesthetic standpoint, have so little, but in terms of wealthness of spirit, a wealth of spirit, they're just abundant in it.
Yeah. Like, and that's it. And the thing is, like, I would never say that nobody has, like, everybody's emotion is valid, regardless. Like, emotions are valid. And there's nobody could ever say to me that my emotions in my 20s weren't valid or my emotions in my 30s weren't valid. They are what they are. But it was that experience for me to see that firsthand. I do think, you know, everything has brought me to this position of where I am now. Like, and I'm so happy with my life. I wouldn't change a facet of it. Mm-hmm. So that means I have no regrets about anything that has been in my past. And, you know, there's been a lot of sadness there, but I wouldn't change it for the world. But I do think that particular summer was the most significant for me in terms of changing my perspective on life. It was powerful. So, like, prior to that, I can't say for sure if I would have this outlook on life if I didn't have that opportunity to go volunteering in Mozambique. So, you know, I was a very unhappy guy, really close to that. So, you know, there can't be any judgment for people in Dublin who aren't happy or in Cork that aren't happy, because I've experienced that too. But it's if anybody could get an opportunity to do that, it's powerful, because it kind of, you know, value systems and things. It kind of gets you a chance to maybe reflect on things. And it might not. I can imagine. For me, it was definitely significant. I can only imagine. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was a big tangent. We go off now. You know me, and I think people watching this podcast know me. I go off on tangents the whole time. Like, we start off with a structure, but we could talk about anything, Colm.
That's the beauty of it, I think.
It really is, man. It really is. And, you know, especially when you have cool people on that are comfortable talking about different things and without any kind of, like, it's just, you know, it's easy when you have somebody to back and forth without any kind of, you know, it's nice. It is nice.
Absolutely.
And in that light, right? So, like, you've obviously alluded to the fact that you know, music is powerful for you, and that you, like, you know, obviously you create a lot of it, but you listen to a lot of it as well. Is there any other kind of resources that have helped you in your development up to now, or, like, is there any kind of big inspirations you have, or books you've read that have left a mark, or, like, even similar stories to what I alluded to there in terms of, like, life-changing experiences? What would you recommend if there's anybody listening? So this might, like, my listeners, you know, would be from all different backgrounds, and, you know, but I'm just interested to see what works for you and if there's any recommendations.
So for me, I mentioned earlier on my teacher, Peter Stanton, who was in the Army No. 1 band down in Cork, and he was my teacher for 15 years. When I was about 19, 20, I was a busker in Dublin. I was busking with my band. I was experiencing, you know, one of the things about busking, I heard Glenn Hansard put it one time, it's the great leveler, because nobody's there to see you. So it's really just your opportunity to say, you know, here I am, take it or leave it. And I was just going through kind of a point of, now I look upon it as a period of growth, but at that time I didn't. At that time I just thought, where the hell is this going? And he woke me up to Eastern philosophy, and in particular a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, who was a profound guru from India. And that, for me, I mean, that book was written in the late 1920s, I think, early 1930s. And Paramahansa Yogananda, for those who don't know, went on to set up a foundation called Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles, which to this day still disseminates yoga. His mission was to bring yoga to the West, and he did. And for me, there was a scientific aspect to it too. So a lot of what he would have been writing about and speaking about in the 20s and 30s is what today we read in the Law of Attraction, this notion of thoughts are universally and not individually created. A truth cannot be created but only perceived, and any erroneous thought of man is the result of an imperfection, great or small, in his discernment. And when I heard words like that, I was like, oh my God, like what? Where has this been all my life? And then, you know, like I really got immersed in the teachings of Self-Realization Fellowship, and it's not a religion, you know. But initially, when it opened, he referred to it as the church of all religions, because it was more about how, kind of what we talk about how you conduct yourself in day-to-day life. So you could be a Catholic, a Muslim, be involved in Judaism or Sikhism or any of that kind of stuff. But it's kind of sharpening your sword, so to speak. So like that when you have moments of reflection, those are deepened moments of reflection. And of course, yoga and meditation, Kriya Yoga in particular, being the crux of all of that. So that book, Autobiography of a Yogi, I draw kind of a line in the sand in my life of, like, I was 21 when I read that book. There's a me before and there's a me after, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, man, that sounds amazing. Like, I was like, where's the closest bookshop? How can I make this happen? I mean, because I haven't read that, but I'm all about that, and that's very cool, man. So like, that's a solid recommendation. Brilliant. And you mentioned like a few philosophers, and you mentioned, like, you know, Jordan Peterson, and you mentioned, you know, there's been a lot of kind of individuals as well that might have had some impact on you, and even your gentleman down in Cork. You know, us Cork people, we have this tendency to, you know, be kind of inspirational human beings that change
the holy city, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
But yeah, so is there anybody else that are out there that you could say, you know what, if I hadn't met that person at that time, my life would be different? Or if I hadn't paid attention to that person in the media, or that writer, or that philosopher, or a person from the past, I don't think my life would be where it is now. Who are the influencers of your life?
There's been a lot of people who are influential kind of in a bypassing sense. You know, I'm a big believer, Daniel, as I'm sure you'll agree, that some of the best people in your life, in your immediate life, are those who, they come along, they bring magic with them, they take you on this incredible journey, and then they're gone, you know? And that could be, you know, friendships, relationships to some description. And a lot of that has shaped me. And I know it might sound very fleeting, or it's not as grandiose as someone like Jordan Peterson or Parman.
Yeah.
But there were people who, just on a very base level, who I had very brief interactions with. Like, there's a song on my new record, it's called I Never Said Thanks. And it's this notion of giving thanks for something. And the chorus is, I jumped through most hoops and I struck out most times. You transcended your faults and you were right about mine. You taught a poor boy that love needs a why and a how. And I never said thanks, but I'm saying it now. And that's that idea that there's always that's
why he's so good. Follow this guy on everything. That is what I was welling up there.
but it's this notion that too often in our life, and you touched on it really well, that there's a lot of people who come in and out of our lives, and it could be, like I said, very just very brief, casual relationships or whatever, and you don't realize until after the fact, when you look back, that those were points of growth, that you really had the mirror put straight in front of yourself and made ask yourself some difficult questions. And I think there's many people in my life like that who, and with that song, I just wanted to take a moment to say, you know, if there was ever a period where you felt like I wasn't giving you 110%, I certainly was. And maybe it was only on reflection that I could really take the bull by the horns and say, you know, thanks for everything. And it wasn't lost on me. And, you know, you have a life of yours, I have a life of mine, but it wasn't lost on me, you know.
Brilliant, man. Brilliant. Like, fair play to you. And that is class. That is really, really class. So, no, look, again, credit where it's due. So yeah, brilliant, man. Like, we've touched on lots of stuff today, and like, and it's just, for me, I've just really enjoyed chatting with you. You know, I'm just so grateful as well that you were able to come on, because I know you're busy, and I know that, you know, that it takes a lot of effort to come on and to chat for the hour. So I do really appreciate you coming on, right? And I really want you to know that. Like, I don't want to be writing a song now in 10 years' time saying, oh, I missed the opportunity to say thanks. Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.
Hey, man, no, listen, it's an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Absolute pleasure.
And we're not done yet. Right. So again, the premise for setting up the podcast, and it was like 9 weeks of me just chatting shit by myself, and you saw a few of those, and then it was the girls, and then last week I interviewed Sean out there, and I was just asking people, you know what, the world is a bit sad at the moment, and the world is a bit stressed at the moment, and the world is a little bit crazy at the moment, right? So everybody, I feel as though, are coming across problems that they haven't come across before, or their problems are now, exacerbated by the pandemic and the situation, right? So all I'm doing is trying to get people on board and get people onto this podcast and maybe share a little bit of wisdom what works for them, or else if it was from, a professional background, some people can allude to, what's generally accepted as best things to do for health and happiness. So I'm just asking you, Colm, if that's okay with you, what would you recommend for people if they were to find themselves in a little bit of a lower place than they were, or, going through tough times at the moment? Like, what are your things that you do for your health and happiness, or what would you encourage others to do for themselves?
Well, apart from listening to your podcast, you mean?
You're good, you.
Well, it's a tough one because I would never claim to have any mastery over these type of things. I have dark days like anybody else,
Yeah. Well, what would you to take yourself out of those dark days? If you had a dark day yourself, it was like, what are the things that just make you happy, make you on the inside a bit lighter, more opportunities to smile? And you've touched on a lot of them already with the music and, reading these books, but like, is there anything else that it works just for you?
Well, one of the things that I try to remind myself a lot of, and I touched on Jordan Peterson there for a little bit and his work that I just find so profound. But one of his great sayings, he goes back to this idea of the archetypal fairy tale where, there's the knight who goes into the dungeon to slay the dragon, to get the gold, to rescue the maiden. And I think in a lot of people's lives, especially, for the likes of myself and yourself when we were young, in the Ireland that we grew up in, entering into a boom, entering into a time of prosperity, there was this notion of like, yes, you can be anything that you want. And it's great to manifest your dreams, and by all means go out and Godspeed to those who chase after what they want. But I think one of the things that we need to remind ourselves is that you don't get the gold without the dragon. So there's something to be slain in your life. And that could be, that could be overcoming your own self-doubt. That could be coming out of, for some people, crippling bouts of depression, which my heart goes out to them. As you and I know well, there are those who never get out the other side of that, and there's many who, I can think of a number of people in my life who I've lost to suicide, and it's an awful thing. And then there's no way to really get inside somebody's head and totally understand what they were going through at that time. But one of the things I try to remind myself of is that you don't get the gold without the dragon. So if you're like, as Bono once said, for anything truly great to happen, there has to be a long-standing obedience in the same direction. So the day you decide to quit might be the day just before you were about to land on your marker. So I would rather stand out there in the rain and cold and fight it, knowing exactly what I'm working towards, than bail and wonder for the rest of my life sitting in the pub somewhere on Leeson Street saying, what the hell could my life be if I just stuck with it,
Well done, mate. Well done. I'm delighted that you beat your dragon. I know you did too, Whoops, I got excited there about my dragon. So my dragon actually was depression, So I fought it, and fought to the level that, like, it was nearly game over for me in 2008. Like, it was suicidal depression, and it was like, that was my dragon, and now overcome my dragon, and now, I got my business, I got my PhD, I'm going for this world of like improving for others, because I know how it feels to have depression as your dragon. And now my business is depression to well-being. It's DT well-being. That's what it stands for. And there's a path for everybody in terms of getting past that dragon and getting up to the damsel in distress, or whatever way we want to phrase
whatever that represents for you. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. But the most important thing is to get past the dragon and keep going, because eventually it will be worth it. And I'm so sorry to hear that you've had people in your life that unfortunately weren't able to overcome the depression, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart, because I've experienced it with others, but again, I was close to myself, so I know how that feels, and nobody, I wouldn't wish it on anybody on the planet. And but look, there's hope and optimism, and there's a light at the end of every tunnel, and all you want to do is just shed a bit of that light, and there's power in it. And I know that you've been doing your part, and I'm just trying to do mine as well, because it's hard to beat the dragon without some sort of a hope, right?
100%. You need your sword, absolutely, whether it be sheathed or unsheathed,
Exactly. But look, mate, that was just inspirational, man. You're going to have me like thinking, look, it was brilliant, and I'm so glad you came on. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to chat with you. I respect what you do professionally and what you do as a person so much. And, you deserve this time in the sun now, because you had such struggles to get to where you are. And I know it's only the start for you. This is only the beginning, mate. This is only the beginning. And we'll face other dragons and we'll face other obstacles, but we know we beat the first one, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I got to say huge kudos to you. When I was doing my research and everything that you've done, I mean, from talking to you alone, I can see that you've gone through a multitude of battles yourself. You've been through very pivotal points in your life. But I think one thing that, and I'll do it now because it's the right time to say it, is that you bring exceptional amounts of light into people's lives. And even from the first few seconds when I was watching your discussion with Fiona Lennon, was that there was just this rapturous sense of rapport, and I feel that you'd have that with most people, even those who you haven't met yet. And today I certainly feel like I've met a long lost pal. So seriously, thank you very much, and thank you for giving me so much of your time too. And I think you want to touch a little bit on Gaelic football as well.
Oh yeah, well that's the second time you've got me to well up now at this podcast. Fuck your third, right? We'll leave that out with the light stuff. So look, we couldn't let the podcast slip away. You actually referenced it to yourself at the very start, But yeah, so Uncle was Jim Gavin, is Jim Gavin, Dublin senior football manager. So how was that like, being involved? Like, obviously, I can't imagine that you had any escape from the drive for five and what was the four? What was the rhyme for four?
That's right. I can't remember.
But I'd say it was a journey, man. And like when I came to Dublin first, so your uncle would have been the manager of the Dublin seniors, and I remember at the same time Joe Schmidt was the manager of the national rugby team.
With the rugby,
I just had such admiration and respect for them as men. They just like two different codes, two different sports, two different men, but they are individuals that would kind of command and demand respect without having to do anything but themselves. And I just had so much admiration for them. And this is hard for me as a Cork man to say, but like they were like, and also no respect to the two Farrells, Desi in the football, and we have the rugby coach as well. It's no disrespect to them, but I would have just had a lot of respect for your uncle. So I hope he's keeping well. I hope he's enjoying does he have any break now? Like, since he's no longer involved, is his life busy? Like, I hope it's
Well, I think a lot of his life now, I mean, one of the things that pushed him to leave the position initially was to spend more time with his kids, and I completely understand that. But he's an inspirational guy in and of himself, a very stoic individual, someone who doesn't really relish the accolades and stuff like that. He just, he knew he had a job to do, and that's kind of, so there's no way, and I never have any issue talking about Jim, because a lot of people say, would you ever get sick of it? But I don't, I always found him to be a hugely inspirational figure. The same with my dad. I mean, the Gavin clan is my dad, Jim, my uncle Brian, and my auntie Anne-Marie, and all four of them are hugely inspirational people in their own right. I mean, a lot of the stoicisms that Jim would have extolled when he was with the Dubs are things that my dad would have been telling me when I was in single digits, you know what I mean? So It's just that the rest of the world got to see it when Jim came to the fore. And and in ways there were moments where I kind of thought, could you not just bathe in the sunlight for a moment? I remember when the lads hit, I think it was a point where they were the longest run without being defeated. And he was asked the question by Darren Cleary on 98 FM. He said, how do you feel about that? And he kind of paused and he said, well, maybe when the lads' careers are over, they might take something from it. And I was like, Jesus, you're breaking all kinds of barriers, but you won't stop and say, yeah, we're delighted, And there's something to be gained from that too. But yeah, he's a hugely inspirational guy. It's no doubt.
Brilliant. And also, just like you, he's humble, and that humility above anything else is something that I respect. So look, the Gavin clan from the Toomey clan, it's nothing but love. And guys, for the rest of you as well, I'll be back next week with another guest learning about stuff that I know nothing about. But I'm so glad coming that you're able to come on, and I mean that now, nothing but love. And for everybody else, that it's just nothing but love.